Hello, everyone. Hi, Olly.
Hi there.
Hello. Right. So this week we're just going to be continuing our tour through the signs and which herbs fit with what signs of the zodiac. And we're doing Virgo. We're slightly late this year, but this will be on the internet for perpetuity. So don't suppose it matters too much. But I'm just going to begin by reading a summary of the sign Virgo. And then, as usual, we've each picked two medicinal plants that we think fit most naturally into that sign, and we'll give our reasons why. So, Virgo is the house of this. By the way, this is from Abu Mashar's The Abbreviation of the Introduction to Astrology, about 12th century or so. So, Virgo is the house of Mercury, and its exaltation is in its 15th degree. Virgo has three decans. The first belongs to the Sun, the second to Venus, the third to Mercury. Its nature is cold and dry, earthy, black bile. It is a bicorporeal sign, two bodied, and in its last part is the equinox. It's of three forms, flying, and in it is a little darkness. To it belong all plants in human form, barren, powerful in voice, beautiful in face, generous and good in its soul. To it belong of the body of man. It's a bit cumbersome. The belly, the large intestine, the small intestine, and the diaphragm. Any surprises or extra thoughts there, Ollie?
No, pretty straightforward. It was interesting about a little bit of darkness and things like that. That was sort of something, that yeah, it was interesting. Um,
Yeah,
um, what do you think he's getting at there?
I'm assuming that the little bit of darkness is probably because it's sort of just as the nights are starting to grow
Oh, of
longer
course, yes.
again.
Prolonged,
You know,
aren't they?
because
Yes.
it's still day is longer than night, but it's the sign that's converting summer into autumn, and it's just
Yes.
before the, as
Yeah.
it said,
No,
just
that
before
makes
the
perfect sense. Yes.
equinox. Yeah, I mean the things that I thought were interesting there from a traditional point of view, it's all pretty. I thought it's a bicorporeal sign, two-bodied, but he says
Yes.
it is of three forms. That was interesting. That's an interesting
Yes.
bit.
And what would those three forms be? I mean, I always
No
think,
idea. I mean, it's just like I'm
I mean, the
assuming
first
this
thing
might
that
be the constellation, perhaps, like Virgo, the woman. Maybe I don't
I
know.
don't know. I mean, you could think like, the sort of Virgin Mother, sort of a crone archetype. There's three forms of women. I don't
Yeah,
know if that we can play with that. It's interesting though, isn't it?
it is. It is. It's considered to be a human sign. So I like that thought, Ollie. Actually, that because it's the sign of the harvest, isn't it? So it's sort of
Exactly. Yes.
it does. I mean, we might be sort of like borrowing from horror movies like the sickle, the reaping and all of that. But the three forms, the Virgin Mother Crone thing, because we're talking about the sort of the seasons from the youth of spring. We're now moving from the adolescence of summer towards middle age. So
Yes.
so it does maybe have some resonance for that. I don't know where that comes from originally, but that's interesting. And then the personality of it was quite nice. They're generous and good in its soul. And then I think the only other surprise there might be flying. It's a sign
Yes. What
associated with flying.
was very odd as well. I mean, again,
Mm.
like,
I
witches
suppose
again.
technology, right? The exaltation of Mercury, one could see that, but obviously these designate. This was written in the 12th century before
Very,
the
very,
invention of
very,
aviation. So, um,
very
yeah,
far-sighted. Yes.
very
I
interesting.
don't know. It's
Maybe it's a
very
windy season. Maybe it has to do with the migration of birds. The end of summer
Could
sort of
be,
thing.
could be. Little bit
Um,
early, but yeah.
Bit early. Yeah, excellent. So this is bilberry. I think this might actually be a picture of blueberry, Vaccinium macrocarpon, because they do get confused. Vaccinium myrtillus is the bilberry, really just a smaller fruit with more of the purple anthocyanins. Now, Culpeper assigns it to Jupiter. He says this is a plant of Jupiter. And I think he probably assigns it to Jupiter because Jupiter, as the benefic planet, symbolizes plants that are harmless, that are usually food grade and beneficial and harmless. And he ascribes it mainly as a sort of strengthener of digestion, something that's good for diarrhea. It's still a use that it has today. The the ripe and unripe fruits, particularly even the ripe fruits, are used to treat diarrhea. And of course, they also make a very tasty jam. But they're not too binding. They're not super astringent, but the anthocyanins in them do have a slightly binding, slightly astringent, sort of microbe inhibiting activity in the gut, which is, so it's very good, gentle remedy for diarrhea. And then in modern herbal medicine, we use the leaves occasionally for sort of type 2 diabetes, or rather, I should say, for pre-diabetes, for loss of insulin sensitivity, which is predisposing to diabetes. They do help to lower blood sugar a bit in infusion, usually in combination with other herbs. They're not very strong. And then modern herbal medicine has found a lot of uses for the purple or blue pigments in this berry, particularly strengthening the microcirculation. So it's used for things like various forms of retinopathy in the eye, like macular degeneration, and any loss of, so particularly related to diabetes, but also aging in general, loss of microcirculation in the eye, help with microcirculation in the hands and feet. So long-term, gentle, supportive, preventive treatment for age-related visual deterioration, for age-related peripheral circulatory problems, and to help in recovery from surgeries and stuff like that. It can help with drainage from the peripheries, like lymphedema. It's not a very strong remedy, but it's a very beneficial, gentle, useful remedy. The reason I would put this, I would agree with Culpeper's assignation to Jupiter because of that traditional property of strengthening digestion and its general harmlessness, but it's got to be Jupiter in Virgo, in my view, for two reasons. And I think you can probably guess what they are, Olly, but judging by your expression. But the first reason would just be its appearance, which is just, it's small. It's like divided. It's got that sort of like the habitat of something ruled by Mercury, in that it's lots of little parts. It doesn't look like a big showy Jupiter plant. It looks more like a mercurial plant in that sense. Also, it's used for stuff to do with the small intestine, the prevention of sort of dysbiosis in the small intestine, the use for diarrhea, that kind of thing. That's a Virgo part of the body. We heard that Abu Mashar assigned Virgo to the intestines. In modern medicine, herbal astrological medicine, we'd also say it has something to do with the pancreas and the gallbladder. Well, here, the leaf of bilberry is used to strengthen pancreatic function in terms of its control of blood sugar. So that would be two, the berries, perhaps for the Virgo part in terms of the small intestine, and then the leaf for the pancreas. And then just the use of it to strengthen little blood vessels all around the body, in the brain, in the eyes, in the hands, in the feet, just everywhere. Small vessels, to me, sounds like a Mercury thing. So, and also the fact that it was regarded as having a slightly cooling and drying nature traditionally would perhaps slant it more towards an earth sign like Virgo. So all of that to me says Jupiter and Virgo. Any additional thoughts on that one, Olly?
So I'm just thinking, I like the attribution. I do. And I think positioning Jupiter, it's because if I'm right, well, correct me if I'm wrong. If we were doing the counting from the house of a planet to along the houses sort of thing, it would be the sixth house, which of course does rule has the same rulership of Virgo. So if you
that's interesting. So you're thinking of Pisces? No, because Pisces, if we're doing, you're thinking of Saunders' system. So
yes, exactly, yes.
So it'd be the seventh. It'd be the seventh from Pisces. And it would be the 10th from Sag. Now, that's not totally mad, because bilberry is used to, the blood vessel strengthening thing does seem to help in kidney disease to some degree.
That was the other thing I was going to say, is modern herbalists, and I remember this was, I think, one of the first indications I was taught when I started herb was for the kidneys, for urinary tract infections and things like that, which of course blueberries are used for as well. So anyway, but that's just
Oh,
that's an
interesting.
interesting.
That's not, it's not something I've ever really used Bill before, but it is closely related to the cranberry, Vaccinium macrocarpon. So I can
Absolutely,
see
but
that.
yeah, but particularly for
Hmm.
kidney things and just getting them going, etc. Which for the microcirculation, of course, it's
that
great.
that would make sense, and I would imagine that the sort of like slightly not so much antimicrobial, not like microbe killing, but that sort of more Jupitery gentle microbe inhibiting activity that it
Yes.
has in the small intestine might well be carried through to some extent to the urinary tract. So I can see that. That's great. That makes sense. Right, Ollie,
Okay.
what's your number one?
Okay, I would like to go with what Culpeper calls wind marjoram rather wonderfully, but what
Hmm.
we call oregano.
Okay.
She's Oreganum officinalis. So again, officinalis
I
sericales.
think this one's Vulgari. It might be called
Bulgari is
officinalis in
okay,
some. Yeah.
but it shows that it was a very popular herb to be used. Any Vulgari and officinalis, second names for the plants, really indicates they were part of the sort of pharmacopoeia. They were commonly used. Anyway, and then again, I think it's ruled by Mercury. And I think it does look like a very, very mercurial plant with their little tiny flowers, and it grows in quite sort of low bushes, etc. So I've got no problem with that attribution. Um, and let's have a look. So let me get onto my Culpeper. It's under the meaning of mercury. It strengthens the stomach and head much, there being a scarce, a better remedy growing for such as the trouble with a sour humour in the stomach. And it restores the appetite being lost, helps the cough and consumption of the lungs. It cleans the body of choler, expels poisons and remedies the infirmities of the spleen. He also said it's very good if you've been poisoned by hemlock, henbane, or opium, which is interesting. I hope never have to try that as effectively, but if you are without anything else and no hospitals, it might be worth a try. Um, he also said the juice being dropped into ears helps deafness, pain, and noise in the ears. Um, so this again, it's very similar to the other things like fennel and marjoram, which are all in the sort of similar category of this herb. But I think to me, the Virgo, the digestive uses really stand out in this one. And nowadays, so it stimulate. We would say it's stimulates appetite and digestion, relieves gas and bloating, and it can be used for internal parasites as well. So that's all digestive things, and it's very popular as a digestive tea for just for bloating removal, etc., and digestion. Also used for respiratory support, clears mucus in coughs, cold, and sinusitis, and can be used as a pain relief as well for arthritis, muscular aches, and things. Um, so I would be very happy putting this in Virgo. I think it's interesting that marjoram, which is very related to them, that they're absolutely they can be used. But marjoram, sweet marjoram, Culpeper puts in Aries. He emphasizes the head aspect of it more. But I think both these, wind marjoram and sweet marjoram, probably act via the digestive system for their nervine properties. I think there's a relaxation there, and it's happening through that. I mean, they both have a mild antibacterial properties as well. They've got a lot of carvacrol and thymol, essential oil in them, and apparently used for fungal skin infections as well. I've never used it for that. I don't know if you have, Marcos. But there's an interesting one. And I guess that's what would be good for parasites as well. And yeah, and so that's um, that's why I put it in Virgo. Again, I'm probably getting Saunders completely wrong here, Marcus. I'm going to have to go back to my textbook on that. But would a Mercury in Virgo under in Virgo assign that to the first house or under the Saunders system?
Yeah, it would be assigned. You're quite right. It would be assigned to the head because Mercury is in its own sign of Virgo,
And so
which he
that
would
would
say
be a
would be equivalent to
secondary
Aries.
attribution to the head, which is basically the other stuff that wind marjoram does. That's just a sort of neatness there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but that's more the ordinary marjoram, which he assigns straight to Aries, or would
Yeah,
definitely
no,
have
no,
that.
but yeah, but that is the
This
head. But I was just thinking for the oregano, it's Mercury in Virgo, which Saunders would apply to the head as well. It's just as a secondary thing. It's just a sort of neatness, symmetry stuff that I like to see.
Yeah, no, I get that. I like that. I like that. It would also be it would also be the fourth sign from Gemini, which would be the stomach, which is the other
Well,
stuff you,
again,
you mentioned.
the other
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
That's
which is
nice.
great. I really like. I've used oregano, however you say it, whatever. Tomato, tomato, all that. I've used it a few times for gastric ulcer, and if it's an
Mm,
alternative for, so people have H pylori, that kind of thing. It can be
right.
quite
Okay.
helpful. And for clearing choler, I find that one really interesting. You mentioned it in the Culpeper thing.
Yes.
If people have, you mentioned externally, yeah, as an antiseptic, but also if people have itchy rashes, I think sometimes, and I'm guessing this might be because of its microbe inhibiting
Yes.
properties, its sort of disinfectant properties in the gut. Probably it'll kill a bunch of naughty things in the gut if you've got a bit of dysbiosis going on,
For
and then that
sure.
will reduce the amount of inflammatory stuff being absorbed into the lymph in the
Yes.
gut, and then that will reduce the amount of systemic inflammation you've got, and then your little Langerhans immune cells in the skin will not be picking up so much inflammatory cack
Yes.
from the general circulation, and then it seems to help the skin. So fascinating. And I quite like it for Virgo, because, as you say, its sort of primary action does seem to be on the guts.
Yes.
It's an interesting one, though, because I mean, one could make definitely a Mercury herb, and definitely a very powerful Mercury herb, which might be another argument for its being Mercury in Virgo.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, one could
because
make other arguments for it, but I think it works as well as many others, I would say. So
absolutely, yes.
yeah. Um, all right.
Okay. Onwards and
Um,
upwards.
I shall move on to my next pick, which is wheat. And this is my own pick. I'm just looking for Culpeper here to see if I can find it. But he has, as usual, alphabetized things in a slightly idiosyncratic way. So I shall have to go to the appendix. But wheat, I know he says it's a herb of Venus. Venus being sweet and sort of ruling things like grains, one might imagine. So Jupiter and Venus were both either sweet or oleaginous, oily in taste. Some say Jupiter is sweet because it rules the blood. Some say Venus is oleaginous. Other sources say the opposite. In modern herbal medicine, modern astrology rather, we tend to think of Venus as being more sweet. But I could see either as being either, really. But I would agree with his wheat thing, because he says it's got a slightly cooling property. Let me see if I can find the 295. So what does he say about it, actually? So wheat under Venus, to eat the corn of green wheat is hurtful to the stomach. The corn of wheat roasted upon an iron pan, so just wheat grains roasted and eaten, are a present remedy for those that are chilled with cold. The oil pressed from wheat germ oil, we now know it as, between two thick pans of iron or plates of iron or copper heated, heals all tetters and ringworms. So it's good for the skin, which of course we now know that wheat germ oil has a lot of vitamin E in it. So it is good for the skin, actually. Being used warm, and thereby Galen saith he hath known many to be cured. Good for ulcers. The green corns of wheat being chewed and applied to the place bitten by a mad dog heals it. Wouldn't rely on that. What else does he say? Hot bread applied for an hour or for 3 days together heals kernels in the throat called the king's evil. They used to use it for scrofula, which is a fascinating treatment, because one might think, was it the bread, or was it some mold growing on the bread? Was it penicillium growing on the bread that might have helped there? I don't know. The flour of wheat being mixed with the juice of henbane, well, that's one very powerful medicine. Stays the flux of humours in the joints. Wheat flour mixed with the yolk of an egg, honey, or turpentine. So he's using it mainly here as a poultice. Draws, cleanses, and heals boils, plagues, sores, and ulcers. The bran of wheatmeal steeped in vinegar, bound in linen, placed on places that have the scurf, morphew, scabs, or leprosy. Basically, irritated skin will take them away. The decoction of bran of wheat or barley is good to bathe places burst by a rupture. And what else do you say? The leaves of wheatmeal bound with salt takes away hardness of the skin, warts, and hard knots in the flesh. So lots of the uses here are external, for sort of to ripen swellings or to soothe irritated skin. But he does have that sort of interesting use for the oil also for skin, and then the present remedy for those that are chilled with cold, the roasted wheat sort of berries, they're sometimes called. Boiled it with water into a thick jelly and taken, it stays spitting of blood. Boiled with mint and butter helps hoarseness of the throat. So it's sort of halfway between a food and a medicine. I think the nature of wheat was often described as slightly cold and moist. So obviously when it was toasted, you're saying it's useful for those who are chilled is interesting, because presumably it's only ever so slightly cooling, which is what Venus was thought to be. The reason I'd put it in Virgo, because none of those medicinal points really relate to Virgo. I mean, one might make an argument for irritation being a mercurial feature, but none of that's really Virgo. And it's mainly because it is archetypally Virgo. Virgo, the sign, is often depicted holding an ear of wheat. The constellation, or the symbol for Virgo, is a lady holding the ear of wheat. It's the constellation that has been linked to the time of year associated with harvest. Plus, Venus in traditional astrology is said to be in its fall in Virgo, meaning that either Venus is struggling a bit in Virgo, or that there might be some hidden naughtiness or some hidden issues associated with it. And we now know, of course, that wheat has, particularly modern forms of wheat, Triticum vulgare, the durum wheat, has an absolute buttload of gluten in it. Now, gluten is not necessarily bad. It is used to make seitan, for example, which is a good protein substitute for vegetarian, vegan people. But it's just that a lot of people are sensitive, immunologically sensitive to gluten. So we know that for most people who eat a lot of gluten-containing foods, it does cause atrophy of the villi, the lining of the gut, a little bit. So it actually irritates the lining of the small intestine and reduces absorption of various minerals and foodstuffs. So you have this food that is a staple crop, that it literally is used to make bread, which is known in the Bible as the staff of life, which supports millions, has this very benefic reputation and, does support life, but also has this hidden problem with it, which has become more and more prevalent the more we've sort of depended on it. And it may be, of course, in the past that lots of people have this mild gluten sensitivity, but they didn't live long enough for that to be a problem on average. Or the people who did live to old age were of hardy stock, so they weren't affected. Of course, nowadays, many more of us are living to old age, which is great, but all the people who would have died in infancy of plagues and whatever are included. So it may be argued that perhaps we're as a society experiencing more of these medical issues related to things like gluten sensitivity, and there may be other factors related to it. Anyway, the astrological argument I'm proposing here is this is a plant identified with Venus because it was gentle in nature, it was sweet tasting, it was a cereal crop, it had these soothing medicinal uses. It could soothe the skin externally, it could bring boils to a head, it could be used to treat sores of various infections, and it could be taken internally when roasted as a sort of warming tonic, much as wheat berries, I think, are still used in Chinese medicine. And that may be because the gliadin, the gluten in it, actually binds to endorphin receptors. It has a subtle soothing, sedating effect. So it does indeed have this sort of like calming, restorative effect taken internally, but it also does have this potentially hidden negative effect on the gut lining if overconsumed, which seems to me to be appropriate for Venus in the sign of her fall. Any thoughts on that, Olly?
No, I was that's absolutely fascinating. I don't use wheat very much in my practice, so that was very interesting. But the wheat oil stuff is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't,
And
other than to make bread,
yes, no,
I
I
make
mean,
spelt
and
bread.
spelt bread, and this is presumably what Culpeper would be talking about, would be spelt wheat, wouldn't it? Because that's what
I
was
don't
knocking
know. I mean,
around.
I'm not sure, Ollie. I think you might be right that might be a closer to spell, or it might be one of the other varieties like Camut, or it might have been a less hybridized form of Durham. You know, one of the
Yeah,
things they
but
say now
certainly
about
it would have had less gluten in his day, I would have
yes,
thought.
yeah, that's another
Um,
factor. We've over agriculturalized wheat. We've bred it to the point where it's got so much gluten in it, and it's mostly I can't remember which. There's alpha and beta gliadin gluten chains, so called, and one of them is more immunoreactive than the other.
right. Yes.
And modern durum wheat is very high in that immunoreactive chain
Yeah.
potentially. So
But I
yeah.
quite agree with the symbolism of Virgo is spot on. So that's great. And
Oh, great.
around where I am, they've been harvesting the wheat for the last few weeks. So that's some
Ha. I do
uh,
think it's one of those herbs plants because that we ought to use more medicinally in a way
agree.
because it's an interesting one. It's like oats and these grasses. For some reason, we sort of seem to
Yeah.
neglect grasses for medicine. And
I don't
actually,
know. I
when
mean,
you
it'd
look
be
at them,
fascinating. I wonder if one could make a tincture of wheat, of spelt wheat, probably. I imagine it might get terribly gummed up with all the gluten, but it might be worth a try, like one
yeah,
does
that
with
would that would be an interesting one. I
probably
think
the
it.
green wheat rather
Of
than
course,
the
there's the
light.
wheatgrass, which we haven't even talked about. That's used as
We
a
haven't. No,
source of
God, no.
lots of antioxidants. It improves the
Yes,
function
yes.
of the vascular system, allegedly. So I think that's really interesting. We could experiment there. Lots of things to experiment with. You could make a sort of green wheat, much as they make green oats tincture, or
Exactly, exactly.
wheatgrass juice and preserve
Yes.
that. Or you could do a sort of wheat berry, as you said, preferably perhaps camut or spelt. A less
Yeah.
immunoreactive variety. And you could perhaps even slightly toast those berries and make
Yes.
a lightly toasted wheat berry tincture, which I imagine would be slightly sweet and a good sort of tonic. Um,
Yes.
yeah, interesting.
Fascinating.
Anyway,
Okay, lots to
all
do
right.
there. Okay,
You're next and last.
next and last is one of my favorite herbs, actually, which is meadowsweet or Queen of the Meadow, as it's called by Culpeper, and this is what he says about it. And it's again, it's a plant of Venus, but you can see, but I put it in Virgo, and you can see it's got some quite sort of mercurial looks about it. It's all its little tiny flowers and its details,
Mm.
etc. Very pretty one. Um, doesn't grow that well in my garden because it likes being in valleys, and I'm on top of a hill. So
Yeah,
this
not
year was
not
a
its
disaster.
ideal
It was so
habitat.
dry,
But
but I keep trying because it is good. Um, well, bear with me a moment. Okay, so what Culpeper says about it, stays all manners of bleedings, fluxes, vomitings, and women's courses, and also their whites. It's said to alter and take away the fits of the quartan eggs to make a merry heart, for which some purpose use the flowers and some the leaves. It helps speedily to the trouble with the colic, and with a little honey taken warm, it opens the belly. Boiled in red wine and drank, it stays the flux of the belly. Also, they recommend it for cankerous or hollow fistulas and ulcers externally, obviously, and also use the leaves for raised blisters. So, but as you can see there, most of it, fluxes are obviously diarrhea and various sort of, just, guts getting out of control, bleedings, ditto, I would say bleeding from the rear end. Um, and what else? And colic, of course, is wind, internal wind. So a lot of
mm.
stuff there that points to a Virgo attribution. Um, and very similar actually to how it's used nowadays. It's relieves heartburn, hyperacidity, reflux, gastritis, calms the stomach lining, reduces bloating, nausea, and diarrhea, and often used for IBS or inflammatory bowel conditions. Um, it's got a tiny bit of salicylin in it, and so it can be used for headaches, arthritis, muscle aches. For the amount of salicylic acid in it, that's probably not what does it just, but because yes, most people know aspirin was originally derived from meadowsweet, and so in the form of salicylic acid, but you need an awful lot of meadowsweet to equivalent to one small aspirin. So I think it's obviously all the components acting together. Can also be used in fevers to support the body's natural cooling process. And it's got lots of tannins in it, which is why they think that's good for the diarrhea and mucosal inflammation. Um, and it really is my go-to herb. I use it as a tea mainly. I do put it into tinctures, but it's great as a tea for people who say, "Oh, I've got terrible gut rot," or I'm feeling anything that if they've drunk too much and are feeling nauseous and horrible. Oh, have a nice cup of meadow sweet. Um, and again, if there's bloating and stuff like that, I usually pop some into a formula as well. It's very nice for that. And it tends to target the guts as well. So I always feel it like if you want something else in it, but to affect the digestive system, it kind of pulls the other herbs down into that area. It seems very attracted to that area. Um, so yeah, so I use it mainly as teas, but I do use it as in tinctures as well, though possibly not as much. And I think though it can be used for all sorts of things, I think it's really, really around the Virgo stuff that it really shines. Anything to say on that, Marcos?
Amazing. Yeah, just that I love this plant as well. It's one of my favorites too. I absolutely love meadow sweet. Um, I'm hung jury on the astrological
Oh,
assignation of this because I can also see it potentially having a Cancer rulership, but I totally go with the Virgo on the basis of, as you say, working in the small intestine. Absolutely, it's got that astringency that you mentioned, which is quite drying, which I would see as maybe an earth sign thing. On the other hand, what pulls me to Cancer a little bit is because I've not grown this, but it grows around my sister's house, right next to a stream. So there used to be
right.
bucket loads of it around there, and it does have that beautiful almondy. And you say it doesn't
Yes.
have a lot of salicylates in it, but it does really smell of methyl salicylate, particularly when
Oh, I mean, it
it's
does
the
have a lot of salicylates in it for a plant, but it doesn't have as
but just
much as
not
in an
enough. Yeah, oh,
aspirin.
absolutely. Point taken. Yeah, not enough to make a bunch of aspirin from. But you need a bushel.
No, it
Um,
smells great. It's
yeah, but it
yeah,
smells beautiful. It's so aromatic and medicinal smelling. The reason I would maybe err towards Cancer, although as I say, I'm pretty hung jury on this because the drying nature and the small intestine targeting points towards Virgo. I think what points me towards Cancer is the little white flowers. The fact that it is a salicylate plant, much like salix, willow, which is also another water-loving
okay, interesting.
you know
Yeah,
what I mean? And of course it loves wet feet. It really loves water.
yeah.
So I could, and of course Cancer rules the stomach and the liver and so I could really see this going in either sign. um I possibly lean more towards Cancer just because I would probably put willow either in Cancer or Pisces, but
Yeah, I
but
mean, I
I'm not
take
I'm not that's not a
all
hill to
points
die on
taken,
for me.
Marcos, and I would lean slightly toward Virgo. It's just that's where I use it most and seems
Yes.
most
Yeah,
useful
yeah, yeah,
for.
yeah.
But yeah, I think we could go. I wouldn't argue massively against either
Is
one
it,
of
again, it's
those.
not a hill for either of us to die on, I don't think. And I'm not. I'm kind of. I can see either one. I mean, as we've said before, folks, that the in medical astrology, this really assigning of plants to signs is a secondary thing. It's a useful thought exercise for learning. The primary thing for making use of the plants, there are two things, well, three actually. One was to know the medicinal action of the plant of whatever plant or medicine you're talking about in general, number one. Number two was when using it with astrology to know what planet you were matching that plant or medicine with. Planet was primary. And then number three, what is the medicinal like temperature and nature humorally? Is this a cooling plant? Is it a heating plant? Is it dry or is it moist? That's that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
those were the three things that were most important. The thing that we're doing in these videos is really a very secondary thing that's a useful thought exercise, and is somewhat practical, but far less important than the primary rulership of the plant. Like what planet is this?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just a nice thought experiment which makes you think more deeply about the nature of the plant and its planetary attributions, etc.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting as well. I mean, hopefully it's interesting. Anyway, if you have found this interesting, please do like it and share it and do all the things. That write some comments below, nice or nasty. We don't care. We like the engagement. Just write what you like, and it's always interesting to hear your guys' thoughts on whether you agree with our classifications or not, whether you have any different thoughts, or whether any other plants that you think belong in this instance Virgo. In any case, we hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do join us for the next one. And
brilliant. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Olly. Bye.